greed, corruption, manipulation, bigotry, control. When I say these words, these descriptors, what comes to mind? Are you perhaps envisioning the mob? Gangs? Are you maybe thinking of the Galactic Empire from Star Wars? What if I told you it was none of those? What if I told you it was right beneath your noses? Is that a saying? I don't know. What if I told you I was talking about the Mormons? Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm sorry about that stupid intro, but yes, today we are talking about none other than the Mormons, or as they prefer to be called, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, some of you smart cookies out there might have put two and two together. He said he escaped a cult. He's talking about the Mormons. Oh, he used to be Mormon. Bingo! You got it. Spot on the money. Now, before we begin, let me start with a few disclaimers. First, is it a cult? Is it actually a cult? I don't know. I don't know that I would really classify it as a cult, hence the quotation marks. Some people do though. One thing that I can say is it 100% was a cult when it started. Awesome. Second, this is not an LDS Mormon hate piece. I have no problem with Mormons in and of themselves, like an individual Mormon. This is mostly about the organization and the doctrine and the rhetoric and all that nitty-gritty stuff. But with that said, let's get into the video. I was raised Mormon from the very first breath I took until I was about 16, 17 years old, give or take. I decided to leave the church. Growing up Mormon is such a strange experience, but it doesn't feel strange when you're in it. It feels normal. And in many ways, it feels like better than being a non-Mormon, because Mormons have this strange obsession with being like perfect, being the perfect person and portraying themselves as the perfect person. When I was growing up, we were taught all sorts of crazy things, but one thing that was always drilled into us is that we need to be the role models for the rest of the world. Yes, us 17 million strong Mormons, which is more like 5 million if you factor in who actually goes to church, including the 8, 9, 10-year-olds, the kids. We have to be the role models that show everybody else how to be a good human being. When I was growing up, most of my experiences were centered around the church to some degree. Aside from school, almost my entire life was, to an extent, controlled by the Mormon church growing up. I went to church every single Sunday, every week of the year, and when I was growing up, it was 3 hours of church. You'd sit for the first hour, which was a combined meeting with everybody in the church. That was called the sacrament meeting or sacrament hour. I don't remember. And then after that, you would go to your split up class with just the boys, and then you would go to your class with boys and girls of your age group. They changed it recently within the past like 5 or 10 years or so to be only 2 hours, but still, it's a lot of church. Then on Sundays, you weren't allowed to do anything. Even when you got home, you couldn't go swimming, you couldn't hang out with friends, you couldn't go shopping or spend money. Everything had to just be chilling at home, reading your scriptures. And it sucked as a kid. It was so boring as a kid, just watching all of my friends go outside on a Sunday and enjoy their second Saturday. And I had to basically waste an entire day, one of my 2 days off from school. It was awful. It was terrible. Aside from actual church, every single week we were attending youth activities, or we were going to baptisms, or we were going to the temple, which is the big, giant, fancy Mormon building where they do their culty rituals. And it was just a lot. Like my entire childhood, my entire life was consumed by this religion that I had no choice but to be a part of and that I believed because it was my entire life. But let me pump the brakes a bit. Who exactly are the Mormons? Where do they come from and what do they believe? Well, it's really complicated, but I'll do my best to try to make a short synopsis of all of it. The Mormon church started in the early 1800s, somewhere around the 1820s, by a dude named Joseph Smith. He had claimed to have seen a vision of God and Jesus as two separate people. In that vision, the first vision as they call it, Joseph was instructed to essentially restart Christ's true church, the true Christian church that had been lost. And so a few years after he received these instructions from God and Jesus, an angel shows up and shows him where these golden plates are that supposedly contain a record of ancient people who had come from Jerusalem, sailed all the way over to the Americas, and had set up shop in the Americas. That's the Book of Mormon. Now, you might be wondering, what does a record of ancient people have to do with Christianity? And the short answer is that Jesus shows up in that book. Now, I'm not going to go into everything that Mormons believe, but it is important to note that it started out as a polygamous cult. Like, Joseph Smith just wanted to bang. Bro had like 30 wives, 3 of them were underage, 1 was 14. If I were to sit and talk about all the gross stuff in Mormon history, like the early Mormon history, we would be here for hours. So I'm gonna kind of skim over that. But if you guys do want me to make a video about that, then that is something I can definitely do. Just let me know in the comments below, but for this video, we're gonna stick to other topics. So with that in mind, we're gonna do a bit of a fast forward through all of that nasty history, and we're gonna come to present times. Now, one thing to note is the Mormon church has gotten really PC in recent years. They've done their absolute best to try to stay out of trouble. Obviously, in 1978, way too late after the civil rights movement, in my opinion, they changed their rules about black people, and black people were suddenly cool. So that's awesome. Early 2000s, they started reworking some of their culty like rituals that were also predatory that happened in their temples. So that's good. In the like late 2010s and 2020s, we've seen slightly, and I mean slightly, improved rhetoric around LGBTQ. Although that wasn't like a smooth process. In 2015, they're like doubled down for it, but they're like, yeah, fuck gay people. Nah, but basically they said if you wanted to be married, like you couldn't get married as a gay person in the church because you would be labeled an apostate, which is basically means you're going to hell in Mormon theology. And also your children wouldn't be able to be baptized until they were 18. So some nasty stuff. But 4 years later, they went and booted that out. They just decided that they got too much bad flack from that one, and suddenly God changed his mind about gay people. So now this is all going to bring me to why and how did I leave, and what have I noticed since I have left. Now, firstly, strangely enough, it wasn't really the church's history that drew me out of Mormonism. That's more something that I learned and obviously disliked after I left. And the reason that is because the church is such a high control group. And being a Mormon, being a member surrounded with a Mormon family, and all of your friends are Mormon, and you go to church and all of that, it's just so much indoctrination, and the church is so good at covering things up. So when I was a member, and I don't know if this is true for all members, but it seems like a pretty common theme from the members that I've spoke to. They have no idea that a lot of this stuff happened, or at least not the truth, right? So they know that God changed his mind about black people in 1978. They're aware of that, but they have some apologetic reason for that. Same thing with polygamy. Like, I remember growing up like, oh, polygamy had to happen because we needed to repopulate the church. Like, what? And it only happened for like 40 years before they shut it down or something like that. At least like publicly. That's just like, how did I ever believe that? It's so ridiculous. But they don't learn things like the things that I pointed out earlier, or the things you probably know. They don't learn that, or they learn different versions of that. So for me, leaving the church wasn't really about those blatantly obvious red flags, because those weren't an issue to me at the time. But what it was mostly on my end, I just, like, my brain developed to an extent that I no longer could reasonably exist while believing in a God. And I won't get into my beliefs. The whole religion thing it just wasn't adding up for me. And so I started to doubt the church really early on into my teenage years, probably around 12, 13, 14, somewhere in those years. And from that point on, for the next few years, it kind of just simmered in me until eventually I almost had quit without quitting. Like, I was still going because my entire family, like I said, my whole support system was Mormon. And so you have no choice. And so I didn't really buy any of it. Like, I had a lesson where they tried to tell me the earth was 6,000 years old. And I was like, listen, pal, we're not going to sit here and have a creationism debate. Like, I've taken science 101, bro. I've been to way too many science classes for you to sit there and tell me evolution didn't happen and the earth is 6,000 years old. My own friends called me a heretic and said I was speaking blasphemy because I didn't believe when the Bible says the earth is 6,000 years old that I had to take that literally. Like, cause I'm like, yeah, clearly they just didn't know. And so they were making something up. Like, is that too, I'm getting so fucking sidetracked right now. Okay, so back to the intro. And this is where we're gonna get into some more serious discussions and really the reason that I dislike the organization so much. Again, I'm going to reiterate, I do not dislike Mormons. Mormons are cool. Like, they're all super friendly. To be fair, they're conditioned to be that way, but they're still friendly. They're still cool people. With that being said, the institution blows. The institution sucks. Before I tell you this, think in your head and guess how much money the Mormon church is worth. I'll give you a few hints. First, they have about 17 million members. Probably half of those, if that, are active. Like, I'm still counted in that number, and I haven't been to church in years, okay? So it's probably more like 5 million active members. If your answer was $100 billion, you are wrong. If your answer was $200 billion, you are wrong. They have $300 billion in basically cash. Like, they own land and they own stocks. What the fuck do they need $300 billion for? You might be thinking, oh, you know, it's a church. They probably give money away. Like, that's why they don't pay taxes, because they're effectively a charity. Wrong. That's wrong. The number that they like to flaunt is $1 billion. They said, oh, we gave $1.4 billion to charity last year. That's counting things like missionary service and their English classes that they provide. So that number is probably significantly inflated. And even if it wasn't, 1 billion of your 300 billion? Just the other day, I'll put the headline up if I can find it. They spent over $140 million buying an apartment complex in Florida, which, by the way, they are the single largest independent landowner in Florida. They're the second largest landowner in the entire United States. Oh, and they didn't tell people about this money. People found out. You know how they found out? Because the church recently got in legal trouble for hiding over $30 billion in illegal shell companies. Oh, and by the way, they just got a slap on the wrist for that. The organization that they created that runs their finances paid $4 million, not billion, million, and the church itself paid $1 million. So in total, for hiding $30 billion, they paid $5 million, which is chump change to a church that's worth $300 billion. Beats me, man. Beats me. So, all right. So what? They have a ton of money. Maybe you can excuse that. Like, if you remember, oh, you know, they need this money to build Zion or the restored, like, whatever they claim they're trying to do. Fine. Maybe you can cope with that. Me personally, I don't understand why they could need that much money and then still ask for 10% of every single member's income, which they do, by the way. But these next couple of ones, I don't know if anybody could be okay with this. You've probably seen the headlines, and unfortunately, it's way more common than it's just being reported. The Mormon Church is infamous for abuse cases, for either silencing abuse or being the actual abusers. Bishops are often told not to go to the cops first when they hear about like SA or abuse or something like that from a child. It's gross. And they've done nothing. They've done nothing in the past years to deal with this issue but deflect. Now, there's one more point I want to address before I wrap this video up. And again, there's a lot that I'm leaving out, like way too much to put in one video, at least not a video that wouldn't be like 7 hours long. But this final point, I kind of touched on it earlier. It's about LGBTQ plus rhetoric and the way they kind of handle the modern age. Because the church claims to be able to speak directly to God, it's really, really weird when they change their policies. Now, the obvious ones, like I said, the black people, the polygamy, all the racist, sexist, weird things that they've done in the past. Like, why does God change his mind about these things? I don't know. But clearly they've had enough time to figure out a reason that they can like side with, that they can use to not feel so shitty about themselves, I guess. I don't know. But when it comes to things that are happening in the modern age, it's weird because they're changing fast, because times are changing fast. The internet, the connectivity of everybody has accelerated the rate to which we're changing drastically. People have never changed this drastically before. And so the church initially, like every other Christian organization, came out as largely anti-gay everything. And that was par for the course, you know, that was par for the course for everybody back in the day, but also especially par for the course for Christians, which Mormons claim to be Christians as well. You guys can debate that in the comments. But in recent years, it's been weird. Even with the so-called positive changes that they've enacted, things like allowing people to be gay, just not getting married, it's not good. And it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage to people who don't deserve to be hurt, to people who are just living their lives. It's not even just the actual members, the LGBTQ members, who are affected. It's the straight white dudes like myself. Because when I was a Mormon, the way we spoke about people who just had a different sexuality, who just wanted to do something different in their private time, it corrupted me to a point where, like, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I was homophobic to a degree. Maybe not to the point where I genuinely despise these people. Like, I never really had an issue. But when you have an organization that you've committed your entire life to telling you that these people cannot go to heaven, that they are lesser than you, it does things to you. And I remember having conflict with that because I had never really interacted with a lot of gay people. Like I said, I was always around Mormons. There's not very many gay Mormons. And it just sucks that, you know, I've outgrown that and I've developed as a person, but that wasn't possible until I left the church. I know for a fact that myself and all of the other young men, pretty much, that I grew up with and that I spent time with in the Mormon church felt similar feelings to this. And it wasn't really their fault. Like, I don't want to try to excuse it, but it's indoctrination. Anyways, I think I'm going to wrap this video up here. Yeah, I escaped a cult, if you want to call it that. Congratulations. Good on me. There's definitely a lot I didn't cover. There's a lot more I could cover. So again, if you want me to make more videos about this, drop it in the comments. One side note before I leave, if you are a member watching this, which I doubt you are, I doubt anybody's watching this, but if you are, do me a favor and just don't leave that comment you always leave in people's ex-Mormon posts. The one that says, you can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. I've heard it 1,000 times. The reason I'm making a video like this, or the reason that I'll have discussions like this with members, is because in my worldview, the same way that you feel like it's a disservice to not preach your gospel to save other humans' lives for eternity, in my worldview, I feel like it's a disservice to not share the things that I know now that I wish I had known when I was in your shoes. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to accept them. Just asking them, maybe you listen to them. And if there's any ex-Mormons watching this, feel free to talk about your experience growing up in a high control church or a cult, if that's how you want to frame it. Anyways, with that being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, all the YouTuber stuff. I'm going to regret this, but I'm going to try to post more frequently. I have to say that because otherwise I'll take a 10-day vacation again like I did before making this video, which honestly by the time this comes out it'll be like a 2-week vacation. Anyways, thanks for all the support on the videos recently. 42 subscribers, my word. That is the true answer to life.